The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. Chapter 4th. What befell Sir Acklon, and how King Arthur fought in a fair at arms with swords, and how he came nigh to losing his life thereby. Here followeth the account of what happened unto Sir Acklon the morning after he went aboard that magic ship with King Arthur as aforetold. Now, when Sir Acklon awoke from that same sleep, it was with him as it had been with King Arthur. For, at first he wist not whether he was still asleep or dreaming, or whether he was awake. For lo, he found himself to be lying beside a marble basin of clear water that gushed up very high from a silver tube. And he perceived that not far from this fountain was a large pavilion of party-coloured silk, which stood upon the borders of a fair meadow of grass. So Sir Acklon was altogether astonished to find himself in this place where he had fallen asleep on board that ship. Wherefore he was afraid that all of this was the fruit of some very evil spell. So he crossed himself and said, God save King Arthur from any harm, for it seems to me that those damsels upon that ship hath wrought some magic upon us for to separate us the one from the other. So saying, he arose from where he lay with intent to inquire further into that matter. Now as he made some noise in bestirring himself, there came forth from that pavilion aforementioned a very hideous dwarf, who saluted him with all civility and with high respect. Then Sir Acklon said to the dwarf, Sir, who are you? Unto which the dwarf made answer, Messire, I belong unto the lady of yonder pavilion, and she hath sent me to bid you welcome to this place, and to invite you to partake of a repast with her. Ha, quoth Sir Acklon, and how was it I came hither? Sir, said the dwarf, I do not know. But when we looked forth this morning we saw you lying here by the fountain side. Then Sir Acklon made great marvel at that which had happened to him, and by he said, Who is thy lady? To which the dwarf replied, She is hight the Lady Nomina the fair hair, and she will be passingly glad of your company in her pavilion. Upon this Sir Acklon rose, and having laved himself at the fountain and so refreshed himself, he went with the dwarf to the pavilion of that lady. And when he had come there, he saw that in the centre of the pavilion was a table of silver spread with a fair white cloth, and covered with very excellent food for a man to break his fast withal. Now immediately Sir Acklon came into the pavilion. The kittens upon the further side thereof were parted, and there entered from a further chamber a very beautiful lady, and gave Sir Acklon welcome to that place. And Sir Acklon said to her, Lady, methinks thou art very civil to invite me thus into thy pavilion. Nay, sir, said the lady, it took no great effort to be civil unto a knight as worthy as thou. Then she said to Sir Acklon, Sir, wilt thou sit here at the table with me and break thy fast? At this Sir Acklon was very glad, for he was a-hungered, and the beauty of the lady pleased him a very great deal, wherefore it afforded him great joy for to be in her company. So they two sat at the table with a very cheerful and pleasant spirit, and the dwarf waited upon them. Now after Sir Acklon and the lady of the pavilion had broken their fast, she spake to him in this wise, Sir Knight, thou appearest to be a very strong and worthy lord, and one very well used to feats of arms and to prowess in battle. To this Sir Acklon made reply, Lady, it does not beseem me to bespeak of my own worth. But this much I may freely say. I have engaged in several affrays in arms in such a measure as a knight with bout and spurs may do, and I believe that both my friends and mine enemies have had reason to say that I have had at all times done my devoirs to the best of my powers. Then the demoiselle said, I believe you are a very brave and worthy knight, and being such you might be of service to a great worthy knight who is in sad need of such service as one knight may render unto another. To this Acklon said, What is this service? And the demoiselle replied, I will tell thee. There is, dwelling not far from this place, a certain knight hight Sir Ontzlake, who hath an elder brother hight Sir Damas. This Sir Damas has served Sir Ontzlake very ill in many ways, and hath deprived him of well nigh all of his patrimony, so that only a little is left to Sir Ontzlake of all the great possessions that were one time his father's. But even such a small hoarding as that Sir Damas begrudges Sir Ontzlake, so that Sir Ontzlake must needs hold what he hath by such force of arms as he may himself maintain. Now Sir Damas has found himself a champion who is a man of a great deal of strength and prowess, and through this champion Sir Damas challenges Sir Ontzlake's right to hold even that small part of lands which was one time his father's. Wherefore, if Sir Ontzlake would retain what is his, he must presently do battle therefor. Now this is a very sad case for Sir Ontzlake, For a short time since, he was wounded by a spear at a tournament and was pierced through both of his thighs. Wherefore, he is now not able to sit upon his horse and defend his rights against assault. Wherefore, meseems that a knight could have no better cause to show his powers than in the defence of so sad a case as this. So spake the lady, and to all she said Sir Accolon listened with great attention. And when she had ended, he said, Lady, I would be indeed right willing to defend Sir Onslake's right. But lo, I have no armour, nor have any arms to do battle withal. Then the damoiselle smiled very kindly upon Sir Accolon, and she said to him, Sir Onslake may easily fit thee with armour that shall be altogether to thy liking. And as for arms, I have in this pavilion a sword that hath but one other foe in all the world. Upon this she arose and went back into the curtained recess from where she had came. And then she presently returned, bringing a certain thing wrapped in a scarlet cloth. And she opened the cloth before Sir Accolon's eyes, and lo, that which she had there was King Arthur's sword Excalibur in his sheath. Then the damoiselle said, This sword shall be thine if thou wilt assume this quarrel upon behalf of Sir Onslake. Now, when Sir Accolon beheld that sword, he wist not what to think, and he said to himself, Certes, either this is Excalibur, or else it is his twin brother. Therewith he drew the blade from out of its shield, and it shined with extraordinary splendour. Then Accolon said, I know not what to think for pure wonder, for this sword is indeed the very image of another sword of water. When he so spake, the damoiselle smiled upon him again, and said, I have heard tell that there is in this world another sword like to this. Then Sir Accolon said, Lady, to win this sword for myself I would be willing to fight any battle whatsoever. And the damoiselle replied, Then, if thou wilt fight this battle for Sir Onslake, thou art free to keep that sword for thine own. At which Sir Accolon was rejoiced beyond all measure for gladness. So it came about that by the wiles of Queen Morgana le Fay, King Arthur was brought to fight a battle unknowingly with a knight very much beloved by him, and that knight had Excalibur to use against his master. For all these things had come to pass through the cunning of Morgana le Fay. Now a fair field was prepared for that battle in such a place as was convenient to both Sir Damas and Sir Onslake, and thither they came upon the day assigned, each with his knight champion and his attendants. Sir Onslake being brought thither in a litter because of the sore wound in his thighs. Also a great many other folk came to behold the combat, for the news thereof had gone forth to a great distance around that place. So, all being in readiness, the two knights that were to do battle in that field were brought within the barriers of combat, each fully armed and each mounted upon a very good horse. Now King Arthur was clad all in the armour of Sir Damas, and Sir Accolon was clad in armour that belonged to Sir Onslake, and the head of each was covered by his helmet, so that neither of these two knew each other. Then the herald came forth and announced the battle was toward, and each knight immediately put himself in readiness for the assault. Thereupon the word for assault had been given. The two rushed forth each from his station, with such speed and fury that it was wonderful to behold. And so they met in the midst of the course with the roar as of thunder, was burst all into small pieces onto the truncheon which he held in his hand. Upon this each knight voided his horse with great skill and address, and allowed it to run well at that field. And each threw aside the truncheon of his spear and drew his sword, and thereupon came the one against the other with the utmost fury of battle. It was at this time that Vivien came to that place upon the behest of Merlin, and she brought with her with such a court and state of beauty that a great many people took notice of her with great pleasure. So Vivien and her court took stand at the barriers where they might behold all that was toward. And Vivien regarded these two knights, and she could not tell which was King Arthur and which was his enemy. Wherefore she said, Well, I will do as Merlin desired me to do, but I must wait and see this battle for a while, ere I should be able to tell which is King Arthur. For it would be a pity to cast my spells upon the wrong knight. So these two knights came together in battle afoot. And first they fought, and then they both struck at the same time, and lo, the sword of King Arthur did not bite into the armour of Sir Accolon, but the sword of Sir Accolon bit very deeply into the armour of King Arthur, and wounded him so sorely that the blood ran down in great quantities into his armour. And after that they were struck very often and very powerfully, and as it was first so afterward. For the sword of Sir Accolon ever bit into the armour of King Arthur, and the sword of King Arthur did not bite into his enemy's armour. So, in a little while it came that King Arthur's armour was almost stained all over red with the blood that flowed out from a great many wounds. And Sir Accolon bled not at all because of the sheath of Excalibur, which he wore at his side. And the blood of King Arthur flowed down into the ground, so that all the grass about it was extinguished with it. So when King Arthur beheld how all the ground was wet with his own blood, and how his enemy bled not at all, he began to fear that he would die in battle. Wherefore he said to himself, How is this? Hath the virtue departed out of Excalibur in his sheath? Were it not otherwise, I would think that this sword which cutteth me so sorely is Excalibur, and that this sword is not Excalibur. Upon this a great despair of death came upon him, and he ran at Sir Accolon, and smote him so sore a blow upon the helm that Sir Accolon nigh fell down upon the ground. But at this blow the sword of King Arthur both shot off at the cross of the handle, and fell into the grass among the blood, and the pommel thereof and the cross thereof was all that King Arthur held in his hand. Now, at that blow Sir Accolon waxed very mad, so he ran at King Arthur with intent to strike him with some dolorous blow. But when he saw that King Arthur was without weapon, he paused his assault and said, Sir Knight, I see that thou art without weapon, and thou hast lost a great deal of blood. Wherefore I demand ye to yield thyself to me as a recreant. Then King Arthur was very much adread of his death was near to him. Yet, because of his royalty, it was not possible for him to yield to any knight. So he said, Nay, Sir Knight, I may not yield unto thee, for I would liever die with honour than yield myself without honour. For, though I lack a weapon, there are particular reasons why I may not lack worship. Wherefore, thou mayst slay me as I am without weapon, and that will be thy shame and not my shame. Well, said Sir Accolon, as for the shame, I will not spare thee unless thou dost yield to me. And King Arthur said, I will not yield me. Thereupon Sir Accolon said, Then stand thou away from me so that I may strike thee. And when King Arthur had done as Sir Accolon bade him, Sir Accolon smote him with such a woeful blow that the king fell down upon his knees. Then Sir Accolon raised Excalibur with intent to strike King Arthur again. And with that all the people who were there cried out upon him to spare so worshipful a knight. But Sir Accolon would not spare him. Then Vivien said upon herself, Sits, that must be King Arthur who is near to his death, and I do make my vow that it would be a great pity for him to die after he has fought so fiercely. So, when Sir Accolon raised his sword that second time with intent to strike his enemy, Vivien smote his hands with a great force, and emitted at the same time a spell of such potency that it appeared to Sir Accolon upon the instant that he had received some very powerful blow upon his arm. For, when that spell, his arm was all benumbed from the fingertips to the hollow of his armpit, and thereupon Excalibur fell out of Sir Accolon's hands and into the grass. Then King Arthur beheld the sword and perceived that it was Excalibur, and therewith he knew that he had been betrayed. Wherefore he cried out thrice in a very loud voice, Treason! 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 And with that he set his knee upon the blade, and before Sir Accolon could stay him, he seized it in his hands. Then it appeared to King Arthur that a great virtue had come to him because of that sword. Wherefore he rose from his knees and ran at Sir Accolon and smote him so sorely that the blade penetrated his armour into the depth of half a palm's breadth. And he smote him again and again, and Sir Accolon cried out in a loud voice and fell upon his hands and knees. Then King Arthur ran to him and catched the sheath of Excalibur and plucked it away from Sir Accolon and flung it away. And thereupon the wounds of Sir Accolon burst out bleeding in great measure. Then King Arthur catched the helmet of Sir Accolon and rushed off his head with intent to slay him. Now, because King Arthur was blinded with his own blood, he did not know Sir Accolon, wherefore he said, Sir Knight, who art thou who hast betrayed me? And Sir Accolon said, I have not betrayed thee. I am Sir Accolon of Gaul, and I am a knight in good worship of King Arthur's court. But when King Arthur heard this, he made great outcry, and he said, How is this? You know who I am? And Sir Accolon said, Nay, I know ye not. Then King Arthur said, I am King Arthur who was thy master. And upon this he took off his helmet, and Sir Accolon knew him. And when Sir Accolon beheld King Arthur, he swooned away and lay like one dead upon the ground. And King Arthur said, Take him hence. Then those who were there were aware who King Arthur was. They burst over the barriers and ran towards him in a great outcry of pity. And King Arthur would have left this place, but upon that he also swooned away, because of the great issue of blood that had come from him. Wherefore all those who were round about took great sorrow, thinking that he was dying. Wherefore they bewailed themselves without stint. Then came Vivien out into the field, and she said, Let me have him, for I believe that I shall be able to cure his hurts. So she commanded that 2 litters should be brought, and she placed King Arthur in one of the litters, and she placed Sir Accolon in the other, and she bore them away to a priory of nuns. that was at no great distance to that place. So, when Vivian had come there, she searched the wounds of King Arthur, and bathed them with a very precious balsam, so that they immediately began to heal. As for Sir Acklon, she would not have to do with his wounds, but let one of her attendants bathe him and dress his hurts. Now, when the next morning had come, King Arthur was so much recovered that he was able to rise, though very weak and sick nigh unto death. So he got up from his couch, and he would not permit anyone to stay him, and he wrapped a cloak about him and went to the place where Sir Acklon lay. When he had come there, he questioned Sir Acklon very narrowly, and Sir Acklon told him all that had happened to him after he had left that ship, and how the strange damsel had given him a sword for to fight with. So when King Arthur heard that all Sir Acklon had to tell him, he said, "Monsieur, I think thou art not to be blamed in this matter, but I much do fear that there is treachery here to compass my ruin." Then he went out from that place, and he found Vivian, and he said to her, "Damsel, I beseech thee to dress the wounds of that knight with the same balsam that thou didst use to dress my wounds." "Lord," said Vivian, "I cannot do so, for I have no more of that balsam." But what she said was false, for she did have some more of that balsam, but she did not choose to use it upon Sir Acklon. So that afternoon Sir Acklon died of his wounds, which he had received in his battle with King Arthur. And that day King Arthur summoned Sir Damas and Sir Ontzlake into his presence, and they came and stood before him, so filled with terror of his majesty that they had not the power to stand, but fell down upon their knees unto him. Then King Arthur said, "I will pardon you, for ye knew not what ye did. But thou, Sir Damas, I believe, art a very false and treasonable knight. Wherefore I shall deprave thee of all thy possessions, but one single castle which thy brother had, and I shall give it unto thee. But all thy possessions I shall give unto Sir Ontzlake. And I shall further ordain that thou shalt never hereafter have the right to ride upon any horse but a palfrey. For thou art not worthy to ride upon a corsair as a true knight hath a right to do. And I commanded of thee that thou shalt presently liberate all those knights who are my companions in captivity. And thou shalt recompense them for all the injury that thou hast done according as it shall be decided by a court of chivalry." Therewith he dismissed those two knights, and they were very glad that he had dealt so mercifully with them.